harbour itself. So in terms of assessment, this application has been submitted under the Listed Building Conservation Areas Act, so consideration is in relation to the impact on historical features which have been outlined in the report and through this presentation in the wider vicinity. Members will be aware there's been a significant amount of commentary in relation to concerns regarding matters which would have ordinarily have been assessed under the planning application process if a planning application was required, predominantly in relation to access. However, as the report sets out, the planning application is not required for the works that are currently shown in the proposal, as they benefit from permitted development rights, and as such those works have the benefits of deemed planning permission. So the consideration of the committee today in effect is limited to the impact of the proposal on the listed elements, being the buildings and or structures, as well as the conservation area adjacent to the north of the application site itself. So as the report sets out, in terms of the impact on these structures and the conservation area itself, it is considered that the impact is not significantly detrimental in terms of the special features of these, and the application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed.
Thanks very much for that, Kevin. We've got nobody indicating that they want to make comment or ask a question, is that right? Gordon, do you have your hand up?
Derek Glenn.
Councillor Glenn.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, I'm looking at this with some interest. I mean, clearly it's something that's generated an awful lot of feedback from the local community in terms of both representations to the planning application and also to sort of the wider community through things like sort of the Harbourside Access Trust, and I understand a kind of a large petition against it locally. I think, although I appreciate the visuals that we've had in terms of the video flyover, for something like this, in terms of understanding and making some kind of judgment on the material considerations, which all seem to relate to the visual impact and the impact that the various types of fencing are going to present to the listed aspects of the site. I wonder whether it might be useful for us, in fact, to have a site visit here.
I can't see what useful purpose that would serve, Derek, but I'd be guided by officers. Is there any advantage, and what could we see in relation to the fence if we were to have a site visit?
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
Derek?
I was going to say more in terms of what you then wouldn't be able to see at ground level that would be obscured in terms of the fencing, because it looks from the pictures that we've seen to be fairly severe fencing that's being proposed in this instance.
Convener, as I can go back to the slide, I'll happily replay the drone footage, but in terms of the listed building schedule for the actual application site for the harbour, the predominant features or the reason it's listing, as stated in the listing schedule, is set out predominantly relates to its architectural and historic value. Sorry, its historic value rather than its architectural merit, and it's a functioning harbour. So therefore, the proposal, in terms of its impact, is considered acceptable on the basis that it doesn't harm the character of what the purpose of the listing schedule is seeking to protect, which is its historic value. In terms of the drone footage, the distinction predominantly relates to the impact of the section, I think section 2, which is the nearest section to the other listed features within the surrounds and the conservation area just to the north. So I'm happy to replay that if that provides members with any greater clarity in terms of the impact on those. But as set out in the report, given the relationship between the harbour being a functioning harbour and the listed buildings within the conservation area, the view of officers in terms of the assessment is that that impact is not so detrimental that it would merit refusing the application, given the impacts on those buildings and the conservation area just adjacent.
My own view is that the drone footage gives us a much clearer view of what's going to be happening and an oversight of the whole harbour than being there on foot and seeing only a tiny piece of the land. But I'll be guided by members. Gordon, do you have your hand up? Is it in relation to a site visit?
Sorry, I dropped out there.
Can I get clarification, please, before I ask my questions? We've had a lot of lobbying from a group called the Burntisland Harbour Listed Building Trust. I'm just wondering if they're represented here today, or if their petition and an independent expert report, which they refer to, has been submitted to Fife Council.
Convener, I'm happy to cover that. The representations listed as assessed within the report are all those that have been submitted within the representation period. I'm aware that there was a late representation. I think there were 5 in total submitted, which came in after the representation period had closed. And I believe that last element you referred to in terms of the report came in beyond that period and therefore was deemed as a late representation to the assessment before us. But in terms of the application and the submission, there's sufficient information for officers to make a judgment and this committee to make that assessment in terms of the impact and the acceptability of the proposal.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Derek, I mean, if you want to make a formal motion for a site visit, then it's up to you. We'll see what the committee thinks. You know my view on it.
I think I'm just concerned, given the level of interest in this and the level of use. I think that that those views are heard. I mean, I don't know whether anyone else is inclined towards the same thing, but it just seemed to me, given that it's an area I'm not overly familiar with, I thought it would be helpful in terms of understanding how best we come to this decision.
Is there a seconder for Derek's motion? No.
It would seem not.
Sorry, Derek.
Okay, no problem.
We'll just carry on. I've got Councillor Langlands. Do you want another question?
Yes, please. I'm looking at the supporting statement from Holder Planning, which has on page 13, item 317, where they say we have outlined above that the health and safety.
Gordon, you're not in a position to. We're not in a position to comment on that. That's not part of the report. Stick to the report.
The Holder, and it's part of the submission on the portal.
Is it part of the application?
Yes, it's nothing to do with the. It's nothing to do with the Burntisland Trust.
Okay, carry on.
It's actually on the portal, and why I'm quoting it is because it says there that health and safety considerations should be a strong material consideration. And because of that, I've got a few questions on sections 1, 2 and 4. And section 1, I'd like to comment about the local B1 bus uses this area as a turning circle, the area between gates 1 and 2. And I'm just wondering if there's any information regarding whether the bus can safely use this area should this should this application succeed.
Gordon,
that's my first question.
Gordon, this is not about the principle of the fence. That's permitted development. This is only about the impact that the fence has on the listed building and the conservation area. So that question is actually relevant.